Hello there and welcome to The Brief with me, Jessy Chahal. It is Thursday's edition. Thanks for being with us. Joining me shortly is Crisis Management Analyst Nordin, Abdullah, and he'll be walking us through the progress of peace talks between Russia and Ukraine. And a little later, I'll speak to the CEO of Suntrack Development Sdn Bhd, James Dunn, on property outlook. Let's begin with updates from this morning's Parliament session. At the Parliament, the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs says they are reviewing proposals to extend JUALAN KELUARGA Malaysia program until the end of Ramadan, following positive responses towards the initiative. However, the implementation is subject to the budget that's been set for the ministry. Still at the Parliament, as of December 31st, 2021, that's last year, 214 cooperation applications were approved for the JUALAN KOPERASI PRIHATIN RAKYAT with allocation of more than 2.5 million ringgit. The program is a subsidy program for cooperatives to run retail activities in reducing prices for daily necessities such as sugar, flour, cooking oil, rice, chicken and eggs. Well, according to UMNO Deputy President, political cooperation between UMNO and PAS through MUAFAKAT Nasional or MN has not ended. However, the ties between the parties is reaching its final chapter. And moving on, applications for a special 10,000 ringgit withdrawal facility from the EPF or Employees Provident Fund is open to members below the age of 55. That will begin on the 1st of April. Members are allowed to withdraw a maximum amount of 10,000 ringgit and a minimum amount of 50 ringgit. The deadline for this application is April 30th, while payments begin April 20th. And with the Health Minister, Kari Jamaluddin has advised senior citizens to complete their vaccinations and get their booster jabs for better self-protection, especially in time of the coming month of Ramadan. He has emphasized that the vaccine is crucial as many senior citizens are expected to perform Tarawih prayers at mosques during these coming months. Well, it's time now to bring in our crisis management analyst, Nordin Abdullah, to walk us through the crisis brief of the day. This time, we'll talk about the peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, which has now entered its fourth round. Nordin, welcome back. Recently, Ukrainian presidential advisor has said that a peace agreement is expected to be signed between both countries as soon as perhaps within the next 1 or 2 weeks, or perhaps even as late as May. From the first round till the fourth round of talks happening right now, has there been any sort of agreement from both sides so far, Nordin?
Well, Jessy, when we talk about peace talks and we talk about any type of negotiation, for me, this is a war and everything can be weaponized, even the peace talks themselves. And whatever side is talking about in terms of the information that they put out and the statements they put out following those peace talks are hints, in a sense, of what they are trying to achieve. And the first thing that we talk about in crisis management and this kind of high-level negotiation is establishing timelines. Now, for different actors in this game, timelines are more imperative than others. Of course, Russia will have more time on its hands than Ukraine, because Ukraine is the country that has the physical incursion into their territory. So that will start to deplete resources. And of course, from a war of attrition, Russia has far more resources than Ukraine. So time is of the essence for Ukraine. On the flip side, sanctions are starting will start to play a role into that game of war of attrition. So there'll be plenty of discussions, and we look at other conflicts in the past. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Peace talks, were daily occurrences in some cases, but never fully utilized or realized into an actual agreement.
Right. So what is the result so far or the progress so far from these peace talks? Have we hit any sort of milestone or a point in discussion?
Well, I think the first milestone is that the fact that they're actually happening, and they're happening very quickly in the conflict, which shows that both sides are actually looking to resolve the conflict quickly. In terms of actual on-the-ground realities, I think the humanitarian corridors are probably the best example of achievement at the moment. But we're also seeing reports in terms of a very shaky adherence to this human corridors from both sides. For different reasons. But the reality is, I think they've actually had some results, and for me, the fact that they're having them is a very good sign in terms of looking to resolve this conflict.
Right. That's your view from a crisis perspective. But based on a few articles that I've been reading online, Nordin, analysts are saying they are skeptical that any negotiations right now will even have a yielding, lasting solution. They believe some chances are there, but they are still quite skeptical that a negotiation or a negotiated solution will be achieved during these talks. What's your take on this? Is there some truth or some angle to their skepticism?
Skepticism or optimistic? The reality is both sides have their strategic objectives. And Russia's strategic objective, as we're coming to learn more and more of it, is the removal of military forces from Ukraine and the demilitarization in their minds, what they define as demilitarization and denazification of the Ukraine, all of Ukraine, because it's on their border. So that's their objective. From a Ukrainian perspective, is the complete removal of all Russian forces from their country. So you've got two very distant ideas here. So now you're going to see the game of compromise, and with that game of compromise, you will see the military campaign continuing. Now, when the military campaign continues, certain objectives will be met from a military perspective, and those military objectives will change the face of the negotiations. The more land that Russia controls, the more difficult it is for Ukraine to negotiate.
Right. So you say it's a game of compromise, Nordin. In crisis management, what are some processes or steps that are important towards achieving an amicable outcome during these peace talks?
First thing, Jessy, and it's a funny thing. You've got to decide how you're going to decide, and that is the negotiation of how the negotiations will take place. The second thing will be setting up timelines. Of course, Ukraine has put out a set of timelines that it could solve in a few weeks. Russia is saying a lot longer. So timelines is the next component of any negotiation. The third will be those objectives, and what is immovable objects in those objectives. So at the moment, we have two immovable objects. One is the Russian objective of demilitarization of Ukraine, which is going exactly the opposite direction, an increased amount of weaponry going into the country. And for Ukraine, the removal of Russian forces is the first line in their requests. So Russian forces continue to take more ground in Ukraine. So you're not going to get to a solution until the movement of military forces stops. And unfortunate, that the possibility of grinding to a stalemate may actually move the peace talks forward faster, or one side or the other making massive military gains. And at the moment, those two items are not on the table.
That's right, which is what I want to very quickly go back to timelines, as you mentioned earlier as well. What sort of timeline would be most ideal given the dire situation for the Ukrainians right now?
Jessy, we're looking at families, we're looking at women and children. The timeline is the timeline of now. And the question is, how do we get there as quickly as possible? We are not in a situation that we truly understand how deep the humanitarian crisis is. It's already several million refugees have been reported moving over the Ukrainian border into the neighboring countries. That will only increase the more, and Russia hasn't even taken half the country yet. So it's only a small percentage of the country has generated 2 million refugees. So the more they take, the more refugees will be generated. So the imperative to get it right will be faster. So the levers in this case are going to be sanctions from the West and NATO, and from the now you see Russia putting their own sanctions on Americans and threatening all kinds of things. So we are nowhere near, if you ask me, a signed document, a peace accord. So we're a long way from that, simply because there's still too many moving parts. So this crisis will continue.
Thanks, Nordin. We'll speak to you again. That was crisis management analyst Nordin Abdullah weighing in on the peace talks in its fourth round between Russia and Ukraine. Well, it's time to move into business in brief. The ringgit has further improved against the US dollar after the Federal Reserve raised interest rates for the first time since 2018 to tame inflation. As of 9 a.m., $1 is 4 ringgit 18 cents. And at the Bursa, it ended higher this morning with continued buying interest led by the technology and healthcare counters. At 12:30 p.m., FBM KLCI was 1587.85, and the physical price of gold stands at 251 ringgit 43 cent per gram. Malaysia is taking part in the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement upgrade negotiations to achieve early resolution. Now, these negotiations are crucial in strengthening intra-regional trade and promote a more connected, inclusive, resilient, and competitive region. And internationally, Sri Lanka's president says the country will work with the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to help solve the country's economic crisis by cutting its trade deficit by 14% this year. The country is struggling to pay for essential imports, including food and fuel, following a drop in its foreign exchange reserves by 70% in the last 2 years. It has already received financial support from China and India in the form of credit lines and currency swaps. Well, the 1st of April will see the reopening of national borders and the hope for the economy to find its groove and bring about some sort of balance. The property market will have to be bespoke, what we have to further suit the needs of the nation as we move into the endemic phase and beyond. Well, at this time in our feature interview, I'm joined by James Tan, the CEO of Suntrack Development Sdn Bhd. James, thanks for doing this. Let's look at projections at this point, James. People are saying that the property market in Malaysia will be in recovery mode for 2022. Nevertheless, as far as the residential market segment is concerned, do you think there is a need for another HOC or home ownership campaign this year to spur buying interest now that HOC 2021 has concluded its run, James?
The HOC campaign was very successful. It has helped many developers, including ourselves, do well. And the benefits are felt downstream to many industry players, SME suppliers, contractor consultants, lawyers, and a lot of employees under the construction industry. And the HOC came in a very timely manner in face of the difficulties of business during the COVID time. Now, to answer your question, and I speak only for myself, we would love for the HOC campaign to continue. However, as a responsible corporate citizen, we would thank the government and we would not pursue it. We would not pursue it because that would be a right thing to do to help the government manage their fiscal balance.
Right. Furthering that, James, let's look at the type of, in terms of its demand, what sort of properties do you think are in demand at this point of time? I mean, from landed residential properties to smaller units, one's in the city, one in greater areas, or a niche high-end property in good location. What seems to be in demand right now?
Quite quickly moving forward, landed residential will always be popular, provided the location is not too far with good connectivity, and developers are all working very hard and creative in creating nice township with amenities and landscape. So landed residential will be the first pick, followed by affordable high-rise residential closer to the city for the people who are willing to outweigh the commute so that it's nearer to the city, to the jobs. That will be my quick take on what would be the demand moving forward.
Right. High demand, high supply. We see many ongoing projects as well. But I guess the big question here, James, is a property buyer may have at this point in terms of how much discount can they get from purchase of properties. Bluntly put, are properties still cheap? Slash affordable, and basically what is the price scenario for the residential, office, commercial, and even factory or industry markets?
Okay. In the last few years, it's broadly still the buyer's market. It's a very competitive industry for the developers. We're all trying to outdo each other with the features, and we're trying to outdo each other by keeping price affordable. So that'll be the quick answer to that. And then your second question was sorry, your second question was in regards to,
In terms of the price scenario,
okay,
what
very
what are we looking
quickly.
at?
Construction costs have risen very sharply in the last 6 months, and it has also been rising in the last 1 year. It would be quite difficult for developers. I believe most developers can't launch houses at a price of at a 2020 price moving forward. So any purchasers who bought their houses in the last few years, that's a great decision because inflation has kicked in. Oil price, steel, aluminium, even concrete has risen quite sharply.
Yeah. So you've got inflation, you've got cost of living that's also risen, you've got cost of supply in terms of its supply chain, all affected by what's happened in the past 2 years. But also, interestingly enough, property designs, that has also taken sort of a new turn. Are developers now moving in the direction of house designs that will incorporate better planned and be better equipped in terms of having study areas or work from home areas to make that whole living experience as well more comfortable, even perhaps looking at simple and small important things like providing more electrical power points and have better connectivity?
Power points and fiber connectivity has always been in good order. I would like to speak generally for the industry. But to answer your question about working from home, so there are developers, including ourselves, who are looking to create co-working, co-study space as part of the common facilities within our residents and our community. So such are some of the tech that we learn from working from home or even studying at home.
Yeah, because I'm sure this is going to really shift the choices they will make as well in terms of buyers when they're looking at the kind of property, even if it's an office space or commercial or even residential. I know for me personally, that's something that I would look into, something that's a bit more green, a bit more accessible, a bit more, livable in that sense.
Absolutely.
But give us an insight, James, into the impact of the new Malaysia My Second Home rules for foreign buyers. This was a bit of an issue as well sometime last year. Reports have said that it has raised income thresholds and fixed deposit placement amounts. This might have deterred new applicants and even reduced foreign interest in local properties. Can this trend be reversed back to its heydays or glory days?
I have no access to the conversations among the government at a senior level, strategic level, but I imagine myself in their shoes, constantly trying to balance the need between foreign investment and protection of sovereign rights. No, I wouldn't call it rights, like opportunities, jobs, or even investment. So I believe that eligible applicants will reduce given that the criteria is an increase. And I'm pretty sure the government has expected that. They have taken that into consideration. Again, it's a weighing game. But I must also caution that with increased criteria, the applicants with higher level of wealth also have more choice. Yeah, other countries are working just as hard as us to attract them. Thailand, for example, is working really hard to attract long-term visas and applicants, long-term stay visa like our MM2H. So we need to work a lot harder for that.
Right. You mentioned higher level of wealth. Of course, in purchasing a property, residential or commercial, cost is a huge issue as well. Very bluntly, James, are prices of properties grossly unaffordable at this point?
Right. I must draw you back some statistics here. You see, I get these questions a lot, sometimes in public conference. The developers have increased price. The gross house price are grossly unaffordable. And then I will be in the conversation to go like, what is your reference point? They will open the newspaper and you see houses for $1 million and above. Well, the newspaper are for new properties. 80% of our residential transactions come from secondary market that you don't hear about in the newspaper. Newspaper are for developers who want to launch high-end properties, harder to sell, lesser market, so they will work harder on marketing. So the cheaper properties, you don't see them around. So the reference point is very important. The best reference point is NAPIC, the National Property Information Center. Malaysia in 2020, median house price, and I always ask people to guess, what is the median house price of Malaysia? 800,000, 700, no, it's 295,000. What's the median house price of Selangor? 390,000. I'm just looking at my report. So perspective is very important to understand, where are we making our reference point of where the houses are grossly unaffordable. And to top that up, RADAR, the Housing Developer Association, has recently done up some research. They have measured in the case study of Selangor, of the 1.6 million houses, 695,000 houses are below the value of 300,000. 695,000 of the 1.6 million houses below the value of 300,000.
Below value versus market rate. They have
market
a different
rate,
market.
Yeah. Based on valuation using statistical approach, they are below the value of 300,000. To put it in perspective, so do we have a shortage of affordable housing? Now, hang on a second. Let's put that against population. How many household income are in B40 in Selangor? The definition of B40 in Selangor is 7,000. We took the number of 6,000, and we have 512,000 households earning below 6,000 against 695,000 affordable houses. To put it in perspective, I like to think we have enough affordable housing in the States. So my appeal to the state government and any policymakers is, instead of building more and more big numbers of affordable housing further and further away from the jobs, the money would be better spent upgrading, improving, repairing existing social housing, PPR flats, closer to the city.
James, thanks for weighing in and sharing your perspective. We'll speak to you again. That was James Tan weighing in a little bit on this year's property outlook and the property landscape at this point. Let's move into international news coverage. The WHO has warned that healthcare is becoming a bargaining tool for war strategy. WHO reports that Ukraine is faltering as healthcare facilities are being targeted, making it impossible to send help, endangering healthcare workers as well. Contrary to international law, the year 2022 has witnessed the highest rate of attacks on healthcare around the globe, with a total of 89 attacks, 43 of which are in Ukraine. In the meantime, according to a German official, it points to NATO's military expansion eastward to be the root cause of the escalating Russia-Ukraine crisis, and EU sanctions on Russia is bound to backfire on itself. NATO military expansion infringes Russia's security needs, and sending weapons to Ukraine will only prolong the crisis, causing more damage to the Ukrainian people. Well, it's also been added that the plan is to slash Russian energy imports, and that will only backfire on the EU countries, including Germany. Meanwhile, Putin announces that while the Western sanctions have thrown the Russian economy into a spiral, he believes the country will adapt and recover soon. Putin's added that while inflation and unemployment is bound to rise with the need for economic structural changes, he's promised that families with children will be supported. He also believes that the Western sanctions over Russia's conflict with Ukraine are just the pretext for the West to impose those sanctions. And the UN seeks to raise $4.3 billion from war-torn Yemen, where the humanitarian funds have been drying up even before global attention diverted to Ukraine. But it has only reached 1.3 billion so far. More than 17 million people are in need of food assistance, which is predicted to rise up to 19 million in the second half of this year. And now on to some news from the Far East. Yesterday, Japan's northeast coast of Fukushima was hit with a powerful earthquake measuring at a magnitude of 7.3, resulting in a tsunami warning called for the region. The tremor shook buildings as far as Tokyo, leaving nearly 2 million households without power. According to authorities, a fire alarm triggered at the Fukushima Daiichi, the same plant that was devastated back in 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. And an overwhelming amount of microplastics have been discovered inside marine wildlife in the coast of Brazil. Plastic objects end up on the ocean floor and break down into smaller pieces that end up inside fish and other creatures, including sea urchins that were extracted from relatively clean area surrounding islands. Well, let's look at what's trending on social media. On Twitter, the chirping bluebird. iOS 15 is a hot topic of discussion among Apple users today with the release of a new set of features under the iOS 15.4 system. And Marvel just released the teaser for Miss Marvel, the studio's first ever Muslim superhero. Excitement among Twitter users, of course, was high. Don't forget to check out the series set to premiere this June 8th on Disney Plus. That hashtag to look out for is hashtag Miss Marvel. Hi. As work from home happens. Hi. I'm just wrapping up the brief today. Before we end, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish Irish citizens here in Malaysia a very happy St. Patrick's Day. Well, that's it. I'm Jessy Chahal signing off and tending to motherhood duties. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye-bye.